Welcome back to the Airbnb Superhost Secrets podcast. Whether you're just dipping your toes into the world of Airbnb or you're already hosting and hitting some snags, this deep dive is for you. We're going to be tackling the biggest mistakes that Airbnb hosts make.
Yeah, and really how to swerve around those pitfalls and set yourself up for success.
Exactly. So let's just jump right in. One of the biggest mistakes we see, especially with new hosts, is skipping that crucial market research. You get so excited about listing your property that you kind of forget to analyze the market.
Yeah, it's so easy to just assume like any property is going to rake in the cash on Airbnb, right? But it really doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
You need to get what your specific area is all about. Like how many people are actually looking for Airbnbs there? Who are you up against? And what are guests willing to pay? If you don't know that, you could end up with a property that just sits empty.
Oof. Yeah, that's definitely not the goal. So where should our listeners even begin with this research? It could be overwhelming.
For sure.
Yeah.
There are some really helpful resources out there. Like you've got paid tools like AirDNA that give you super detailed data. But honestly, even just going on Airbnb itself can teach you a lot. It's like playing detective. You go on there, you check out what other listings are doing, how they're showing off their properties, what they're offering, and how they change their prices.
I like that. It's like you're getting a sneak peek behind the scenes before you even start your own show.
Exactly.
But research isn't just about the competition. It's also about knowing the rules of the game, right?
Oh, absolutely. Mistake number 2 is forgetting about all that legal and regulatory stuff. I know it's not the most exciting part, but trust me, it's way better to deal with it up front than have a nasty surprise later.
Yeah, nobody wants a visit from the city saying their Airbnb is illegal.
Exactly. Cities and towns are getting a lot stricter about short-term rentals these days.
Yeah.
And the rules can be totally different depending on where you are. You really need to dig into those zoning regulations, permits, and any specific rules for short-term rentals in your area. It's all about protecting yourself and your business.
Ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Right. Okay, so we've done our research. We know the rules. Now what? What's the next mistake to avoid?
So this is where it gets interesting. Mistake number 3 is having a property that's, well, a little bland. You can't just throw up a listing with some blurry photos from your phone and a boring description and expect people to be fighting over it.
It's like showing up to a job interview in your pajamas. You gotta make an effort.
Exactly. Guests are looking for something special, something that grabs their attention and makes them excited to stay at your place. Remember, they're choosing your listing out of tons of others, so it needs to stand out.
So how do we make sure our property doesn't get lost in the crowd? How do we create that wow factor?
Think about who you want to stay at your place. What are they looking for in an Airbnb? Maybe they want to be close to hiking trails, or maybe they want a really stylish place or something that's perfect for families. Go back to your market research and figure out what those people want, and then make sure your listing shows off those things. Okay, so we're tailoring everything to our ideal guest. Got it.
Yeah.
What about those must-have amenities? What are the things we absolutely can't skimp on?
Great question. Mistake number 4 is forgetting about those basic amenities that guests expect. Things like toiletries, toilet paper stuff for the kitchen, those things that make a stay comfortable and easy. You'd be surprised how many hosts overlook this stuff.
I think some hosts get caught up in the whole self-catering idea, but guests still want to feel welcomed and taken care of, right?
Absolutely. Think about those first impressions. When a guest walks in and there's no soap or shampoo, it just starts things off on the wrong foot.
Yeah, it's all about creating that welcoming and comfortable atmosphere as soon as they walk in the door.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those little details can make a huge difference.
Okay, so we're stocked up on the essentials. The place is spotless, and we've got professional photos that show off the best features. Now, the big question, how do we figure out the right price?
Pricing is tough. And mistake number 5 is either pricing yourself too high, which scares guests away, or going too low and missing out on potential earnings.
It's definitely a balancing act.
It is. And it's more than just looking at what other places are charging. You have to think about things like what time of year it is, how many people are looking for Airbnbs, and even how long guests are staying.
So what's the secret to finding that sweet spot?
First, you got to understand the different pricing strategies out there. There's something called occupancy-based pricing, where your rates automatically change based on how full other Airbnbs in your area are. So you charge more when it's busy and less when it's slower. Then there's length of stay pricing, where you give discounts for longer bookings, and of course you need to adjust for different seasons.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. It sounds like pricing could be a whole deep dive on its own.
It totally could. But the main thing is to not just copy what other hosts are doing.
Yeah.
You have to look at your specific market, what makes your property unique, and figure out a pricing strategy that works for you.
And remember, you can always adjust your prices as you go. It's all about trying things out and seeing what works best. Now let's talk about check-in and check-out. What are some common mistakes hosts make in that area?
Ah, yeah. Mistake number 6 is making check-in and check-out a total pain for your guests. Hiding keys, having confusing instructions, making them go on a treasure hunt just to get into the property. You want to make this as easy as possible for them.
Yeah, especially after they've been traveling all day. The last thing they want is to spend an hour trying to figure out how to get in.
Exactly. Be clear with your instructions, maybe even do a video guide. And think about getting a smart lock.
I've heard good things about those. Can you tell us a little more about how they work?
Oh, they're game changers. You can give each guest their own code so you don't have to worry about keys getting lost or copied. And you can keep track of who's coming and going, which is great for security.
No more late night calls from guests who can't find the key. Speaking of potential problems, how do we make sure we're getting the right guests for our property? How do we avoid those nightmare situations?
That's a great question. That brings us to mistake number 7, not properly vetting your guests. It's tempting to think that everyone on Airbnb is going to be amazing, but that's not always the reality.
So we need to be a little careful.
For sure. It's like choosing someone to live with. You wouldn't just give your keys to a stranger without checking them out, right? Same goes for Airbnb guests.
So what are some practical things we can do to vet guests?
First things first, read those guest reviews. They can tell you a lot about how someone has behaved in the past. You can also check their ID through Airbnb, set clear house rules, and even have a quick chat with potential guests before they book. It's a chance to get a feel for them and answer any questions.
Like a little interview to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And trust me, taking the time to vet guests up front can save you so much stress and trouble later.
All right, so we've talked about first impressions, amenities, pricing, even checking out our guests. What about after the stay? How do we handle guest feedback, especially those reviews that aren't so great?
That's mistake number 8, ignoring guest feedback. Reviews are super important for getting future bookings. They can really make or break your success on Airbnb.
I know reviews can be scary, especially the negative ones. How do we deal with them without taking it personally?
Remember that all feedback, even the negative stuff, is helpful. It's a chance to learn and make your property even better. Plus, future guests like to see that you take feedback seriously and you're trying to fix any problems.
So even a bad review can show that we're professional and we care about our guests.
Absolutely. And remember, a few negative reviews here and there are totally normal. Nobody's perfect, and everyone has different expectations. What matters is how you respond to that feedback and show that you're always trying to improve.
Makes sense.
Well,
We'll kind of embrace those learning opportunities.
yeah,
But what about relying only on Airbnb for bookings? Is that a mistake?
it can be. Yeah, mistake number 9 is putting all your eggs in one basket. If you're only on Airbnb, you're kind of stuck with their rules, their fees, and whatever changes they decide to make.
So it's good to have options.
Exactly. Listing your property on other platforms like Booking.com can get you more bookings and make you less dependent on just one company.
It's like having a backup plan in case something happens.
Exactly. And different platforms attract different kinds of travelers, so you're reaching more people. Smart. Okay, so we're managing listings on multiple platforms, dealing with reviews, staying on top of all the rules. It's starting to sound like we need a personal assistant. Is there any way to make all of this easier?
There is. That's where technology comes in. Mistake number 10 is ignoring all the amazing tools that can help you manage your Airbnb business more efficiently.
I love this part. Tell me more about these time-saving tools.
Think of it like having a virtual assistant for your Airbnb. There are channel managers that keep your calendars synced and manage your bookings across all those platforms. Then there are automated messaging systems that send personalized messages to your guests at different times, like when they book or the day before they leave. And don't forget about pricing tools that use data to help you set the best prices.
This sounds like it could save so much time and stress. Where can our listeners learn more about these tools?
Oh, there are tons of resources online. Just search for Airbnb automation tools, and you'll find a bunch. And don't be afraid to try different ones out and see what works best for you. Great advice. It's all about finding the right tools to help you work smarter, not harder. But even with all this tech, it's still important to build relationships with our guests right.
You got it. And that leads us to mistake number 11, not getting your guests' email addresses. This is a huge opportunity to build your own marketing list and encourage those awesome commission-free bookings from guests who come back.
Commission-free. Tell me more. How can our listeners start making those direct connections?
Be upfront about it. Don't try to trick people into giving you their email. Just explain why you're asking and what they'll get in return. Maybe it's a newsletter with local tips and discounts or early access to special offers.
So it's a win-win.
Hmm.
We get to stay in touch, and they get something valuable. What are some practical ways to collect those emails?
You can add a call to action in your welcome message, inviting guests to sign up for your newsletter. You can have a guest book at the property where they can write down their email. And like we talked about before, some hosts use tools like Staffy that link Wi-Fi access to email capture.
That's clever. But what about guests who don't want to share their email?
Respect their decision.
Hmm.
Not everyone is comfortable with that, and that's totally fine. Focus on giving everyone a great experience, whether or not they give you their email.
Good point. It's all about building trust and creating a positive experience for everyone. But let's talk about some other ways to improve our hosting. You mentioned that automation can save a lot of time. Can you give us some specific examples of how we can use it in our business?
Absolutely. Let's start with communication. Answering guest questions can take up a lot of time, especially if you have multiple properties. Automated messaging can be a lifesaver.
So instead of answering every question about check-in or the Wi-Fi password, we can set up automatic responses.
You got it.
Hmm.
You can write templates for the most common questions and even schedule those messages to go out at certain times, like a welcome message when someone books or a reminder about checkout the day before they leave.
It's like having a virtual assistant handling all the basic stuff so we can focus on the more personal interactions.
Exactly. And while we're talking about efficiency, let's talk about pricing. We touched on this before, but dynamic pricing tools are amazing, especially if you have a lot of properties or if demand changes a lot.
For those who don't know, can you explain what dynamic pricing is?
Think of it like airline tickets. You know how the prices for flights are always changing based on demand, the time of year, and other things? Dynamic pricing for Airbnb works the same way. It uses super smart algorithms to look at market trends, what your competitors are charging, even events happening in your area to help you set the best price for your property at any given time.
So it's using data to make pricing decisions for us.
Exactly. It helps you stay competitive and make the most money. Instead of changing your prices manually all the time, these tools do it for you.
Sounds like a huge time saver. Are there any other automation tools you recommend?
Oh, tons. There are tools for almost everything: cleaning, maintenance, screening guests, even finding local experiences and recommendations for your guests.
It's like a whole support system for Airbnb hosts. But with so many choices, it can be hard to know where to start. Any advice for our listeners who are new to this?
Figure out what your biggest challenges are. What are the things that take up the most time or cause the most headaches? Once you know what you need to fix, you can start looking for tools that solve those specific problems.
Work smarter, not harder, right? And embrace the technology that can make our lives easier and our businesses better. But with all this talk about automation and efficiency, let's not forget about the human side of hosting. In the end, it's all about creating amazing experiences for our guests.
You're absolutely right. Technology is great, but it should never replace that personal touch. Think about those little things that make a guest feel welcome and appreciated.
Like a handwritten welcome note, a basket of local snacks, or personalized recommendations for things to do in the area.
Exactly. Those little touches make a huge difference. They show that you care about your guests and want them to have a great time.
It's about making them feel like they're staying with a friend, not just renting a place.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Technology is great, but it should never replace that personal touch. Think about those little things that make a guest feel welcome and appreciated.
Like a handwritten welcome note,
Mhm.
a basket of local snacks, or personalized recommendations for things to do in the area.
Exactly. Those little touches make a huge difference. They show that you care about your guests and want them to have a great time.
It's about making them feel like they're staying with a friend, not just renting a place. But as we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what sets apart those truly exceptional hosts from the rest. What are the qualities or habits that make them stand out?
That's a great question. I think it boils down to a few key things: a genuine passion for hospitality, a commitment to continuous learning, and an unwavering focus on the guest experience.
Can you elaborate on each of those points? What does that look like in practice?
Those who truly excel at hosting genuinely enjoy creating welcoming and memorable experiences for others. They go above and beyond to anticipate their guests' needs and make them feel at home. They're also committed to constantly learning and improving. They stay up to date on industry trends, they seek out feedback, and they're always looking for ways to enhance their offerings.
It's that growth mindset we talked about earlier. They're not afraid to experiment, to try new things, and to constantly evolve as hosts.
Exactly. And finally, they understand that the guest experience is paramount. Every decision they make, from the amenities they provide to the way they communicate with guests, is centered around creating a positive and memorable stay.
It's about going beyond the transactional and creating a genuine connection with your guests.
Precisely. And that's what ultimately leads to those glowing reviews, repeat bookings, and long-term success in the world of Airbnb hosting.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I feel like we've covered so much ground already, but I know there's still more to explore.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. So listeners, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll be wrapping up our deep dive with some final thoughts and actionable advice to help you put all of these strategies into practice.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Airbnb Superhost Secrets podcast. We've covered so much in this deep dive, from market research and pricing to all those awesome automation tools and building those relationships with our guests.
It's been a whirlwind tour of Airbnb hosting.
It really has. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure our listeners are ready to put all these amazing tips into action. So for those just starting out, what's the most important first step?
You know, if I had to pick just one, it would be to figure out who your ideal guest is. Like, who are you trying to attract? What kind of experience do you want to create for them?
It's like building that perfect guest profile, right?
Yeah,
We need to know what they want, what they like, and what they're looking for in an Airbnb.
exactly. Once you know who you're targeting, everything else becomes so much clearer. You can make sure your property, your amenities, even your prices are all speaking directly to those people.
Okay, so it's all about getting super specific with who we're serving. But let's say we've already got our ideal guest in mind. What are some practical things we can do to make their experience amazing?
Think about everything the guest goes through, from the second they book your property to the moment they check out. What are all those little moments where you can make a positive impact?
So it starts with that first message after they book.
Hmm.
How can we make that initial contact memorable?
Ditch the generic confirmation message. Take a second to personalize it. Thank them for choosing your property. Maybe ask if they have any questions or special requests, and offer a few suggestions for things to do in the area.
It's all about creating that warm and welcoming vibe from the very beginning. What about communication before they arrive? What info should we be giving them?
Make sure they have clear instructions for check-in, including any codes or directions. Give them info about the property itself, like Wi-Fi passwords, how to use the appliances, and any house rules. And don't forget those local tips and recommendations, like good restaurants, nearby grocery stores, and attractions.
So we're giving them everything they need to feel comfortable and ready for their stay. But what about those extra special touches that can really elevate the experience?
Those little things that make a guest feel like a VIP, like a welcome basket with snacks and drinks, a handwritten note, or maybe even a small gift that's tailored to their interests.
Those gestures can make such a difference. They show that we're not just running a business, we actually care about our guests and want them to have a great time.
Exactly. And don't forget to ask for feedback. Encourage guests to leave reviews and take the time to respond to them, whether they're good or bad.
Responding to reviews shows that we're listening and that we care about what our guests think, and it can give us some really valuable feedback to help us improve. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about always learning. How can hosts stay ahead of the game and keep their skills sharp in this industry that's constantly changing?
Never stop being a student. Go to industry events, read books and articles, listen to podcasts like this one, and connect with other hosts online, in forums and communities.
It's all about staying curious, learning new things, and embracing those opportunities to grow. And remember, the world of Airbnb is always evolving, so what works today might not work tomorrow. Be flexible, be open to new ideas, and don't be afraid to try things out.
Absolutely. And most importantly, have fun with it. Hosting can be tough, but it's also super rewarding. You get to meet incredible people from all over the world, share your space with them, and create these amazing experiences.
It's such a unique and fulfilling way to build a business and connect with people on a real level. So to all our listeners out there, whether you're just starting out or you're already a seasoned superhost, remember that success on Airbnb comes down to passion, dedication, and a genuine desire to create exceptional experiences for your guests.
And don't forget the power of a warm welcome, a thoughtful gesture, and a genuine smile. Those are the things that really make a difference and create lasting memories for both you and your guests.
Such great advice. Thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Airbnb Superhost Secrets podcast. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into the world of short-term rentals. Until then, happy hosting.